They were the famed company of heroes representing the races of all the free peoples of Middle-earth. 9 companions set against the 9 ring wraiths of the enemy. However, every tale and every life has an ending. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the lives of the Fellowship after the War of the Ring. We must first acknowledge that one of the Fellowship does not live to see the quest fulfilled and the days renewed. Boromir, after attempting to take the ring from Frodo, would valiantly defend Merry and Pippin from the orcs, at the cost of his own life. Thus Boromir, heir of Denethor, Lord of the Tower Guard, dies on February 26, 3019 at Amon Hen, at the age of 41. The river Anduin would bear his body out to its final resting place, the Great Sea. After the destruction of the ring, all the remaining Fellowship would be on hand just over a month later for King Elessar's coronation, the wedding of Aragorn and Arwen, and after spending a further 5 months in Gondor, they would travel to Rohan for the burial and funeral of King Theoden. Riding north from Edoras, they would stop at Helm's Deep, where Legolas visits the Glittering Caves with Gimli. On August 22, 3019, they arrive at Isengard, where the Fellowship would formally disband. But all save Legolas said that they must now take their leave and depart either south or west. "Come, Gimli," said Legolas. "Now by Fangorn's leave, I will visit the deep places of the Entwood, and see such trees as are nowhere else to be found in Middle-earth. You shall come with me and keep your word, and thus we will journey on together to our own lands in Mirkwood and beyond." To this Gimli agreed, though with no great delight it seemed. "Here then at last comes the ending of the Fellowship of the Ring," said Aragorn. "Yet I hope that ere long you will return to my land, with the help that you promised."
"We will come if our lords allow it,"
said Gimli.
"Well, farewell, my hobbits. You should come safe to your own homes now, and I shall not be kept awake for fear of your peril. We will send word when we may, and some of us may yet meet at times. But I fear that we shall not all be gathered together ever again."
This moment would indeed be the final time all 8 surviving members of the Fellowship would be together in one place. So as Gimli and Legolas head to Fangorn, and Aragorn back to Gondor, Gandalf accompanies the hobbits north toward Rivendell. Now, I've made an entire video covering the coming weeks for the hobbits in the Scouring of the Shire, so we'll pick up with our heroes in their final days. The next companions to have their stories come to an end are Frodo and Gandalf. Prior to sailing west, Gandalf had spent the past 2 years visiting Tom Bombadil. What the two great beings conversed about, we can only guess. Needless to say, a conversation between Tom, oldest and fatherless, and Gandalf the White, who was resurrected by Eru himself, would be incredibly interesting. As for Frodo, he would serve as the mayor of Mickle Delving for a period of at least a few months until Will Whitfoot is restored to the role. He would also return to live in Bag End and see the first efforts of reviving the Shire from Saruman's scouring. However, he would fall ill every March 13th and October 6th, the anniversaries of being poisoned by Shelob and being stabbed by the Witch King, respectively. After suffering from the lasting effects of his wounds for these 2 years, Frodo sets out to the Grey Havens on September 21st, 3021. There, Frodo would bid farewell to his fellow hobbits before joining Gandalf on the White Ship.
"Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea comes the end of our fellowship in Middle-earth. Go in peace. I will not say do not weep, for not all tears are an evil."
Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard. And the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth. And the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost. And the ship went out into the high sea, and passed on into the west, until at last, on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the gray rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. Thus, on September 29, 3021, Frodo and Gandalf sail into the west. Frodo is said to have lived the rest of his mortal days in a period of reflection and peace on the Isle of Tol Eressëa. Gandalf would finally return to Valinor over 3,000 years after leaving, his mission fulfilled, for he had supported and kindled the hearts of the free peoples to overcome the evil of Sauron. The three hobbits returned to the Shire, Sam notably upon his trusty pony, Bill. Sam would be instrumental in the restoration of the Shire, having already put the Lorien soil given by the Lady Galadriel to great use. He had also by this time been married to Rosie Cotton for nearly a year and a half, and together they had had their first child, Eleanor, born on the second anniversary of the destruction of the ring. Sam and Rosie would go on to have a total of 13 children: Eleanor, Frodo, Rose, Merry, Pippin, Goldilocks, Hamfast, Daisy, Primrose, Bilbo, Ruby, Robin, and Tolman. And their family would be known not by the name Gamgee, but by the name Gardener, in honor of their father's efforts in restoring the Shire. Their family would live many long years together in Bag End, as Frodo had made Samwise his heir. After Will Whitfoot resigned his post as mayor of Mickle Delving in the year 6 of the Fourth Age, Sam would be elected to the role. In fact, he would go on to serve 7 consecutive 7-year terms. In the year following his first election, Sam's father, Gaffer Gamgee, would pass away at the age of 102. 9 years into his eventual 49-year service, Sam, along with Merry and Pippin, would meet King Elessar and Queen Arwen on the Brandywine Bridge. At this time, Aragorn awards Sam with the Star of the Dunedain. His role of mayor is also appointed to be a counselor of the North Kingdom, and his daughter Eleanor is made a maid of honor to Queen Arwen. We are told that in the year 41 of the Fourth Age, Sam and Eleanor would make the long journey south, spending an entire year in Gondor. 20 years later, in 61 of the Fourth Age, Rosie would die at the age of 98 years old. Later that year, on September 22nd, Bilbo and Frodo's birthday, Sam would leave Bag End for the final time. He leaves Eleanor at the Tower Hills, entrusting to her the Red Book of Westmarch, in which Bilbo and Frodo had documented their adventures. Sam would make his way to the Grey Havens at the age of 102, and 61 years after bidding farewell, he would be reunited with his friend, Frodo Baggins. Merry and Pippin would also have many long years remaining in the Shire after the turn of the Fourth Age. Pippin marries Diamond of Longcleave in the year 6 of the Fourth Age, and 3 years later they would have their only child, Faramir. In the year 13, Pippin succeeds his father and becomes the 32nd Thane of the Shire, another role made a counselor of the North Kingdom by King Elessar. In 42 of the Fourth Age, Pippin's son Faramir would marry Sam's daughter, Goldilocks Gardener. During his years as Thane, Pippin would collect a library of historical accounts within the Great Took family residence in Tuckborough. He particularly collects information relating to Númenor and the heirs of Elendil. It's through Pippin's efforts, with the help of Merry, that we get the Tale of Years, otherwise known as Appendix B of The Lord of the Rings. As for Merry, he would not only assist with Pippin's historical accounts, but also write several scholarly works of his own, including Herblore of the Shire, The Reckoning of Years, and Old Words and Names in the Shire. It is said that Merry visited Rivendell several times during the course of his later life, which was no doubt helpful in helping Pippin with the Tale of Years. Like Pippin, Merry would succeed his father in a prominent role of Shire leadership, becoming the 8th Master of Buckland in the year 11 of the Fourth Age. Like Sam and Pippin, Merry's role was also made a counselor of the North Kingdom by King Elessar in 13 of the Fourth Age. Merry would marry Fatty Bulger's sister, Estella, and together they would have at least one son. Like so much of their lives, the waning days of Merry and Pippin are tied together. In the 63rd year of the Fourth Age, Merry receives an invitation from King Eomer, who wishes to see him once more before the end of his life. Merry and Pippin leave their possessions and their titles to their children, leaving the Shire for the last time. The friends make their way to Rohan, where they would stay with Eomer until the king's death that very year at the age of 93. From there, they travel on to Minas Tirith, spending their remaining days with Aragorn in Gondor. While it is believed Éowyn may have already died by this time, it's possible that Pippin was able to see an elderly Faramir before his end. Merry and Pippin would live out their remaining days in Gondor, and upon their deaths, their bodies would be laid to rest in Rath Dinen, the hallows where the kings and stewards of Gondor were entombed. As for the king himself, Aragorn would reign for 122 years after the defeat of Sauron. In the early days of his rule, he would set to reordering his kingdom. One of his first actions is to pardon all the Easterlings who had given themselves up, sending them away free. He would also make peace with the peoples of Harad. As for the heart of Sauron's evil kingdom, Aragorn frees the mannish slaves of Mordor and gives to them all the lands about Lake Nirnen to be their own. Before the Fellowship disbanded at Orthanc, Aragorn would order its restoration, during which the long-lost Elendilmir, an heirloom lost with Isildur, would be found in Saruman's old fortress, along with many other treasures. Aragorn takes the Elendilmir as he establishes his full kingship of not only Gondor, but the northern kingdom of Arnor. Aragorn reigns as the king of the reunited kingdom. As for Orthanc itself, he turns the realm over to the Ents to rule, renaming it the Treegarth of Orthanc. He would also declare the Druidan Forest to belong to the Druidine as a protected enclave of his kingdom, and decreeing that no one should enter it without the permission of the Druidine. He would likewise declare the same of the Shire, that no one should enter the land of the Halflings without the Hobbits' permission. As for his own realm, he would make Faramir not only his steward, but also Prince of Ithilien. It is also said that Aragorn would order Minas Morgul to be utterly destroyed, for no one could dwell in that evil place for many long years. As for Rohan, King Elessar and King Éomer would renew the oaths of Cirion and Eorl, pledging to come to one another's aid in everlasting friendship. It is said in the early Fourth Age that Éomer would often fulfill his oath, riding with Aragorn to both the east and the south. For while Sauron had been defeated, there were still those loyal to him that would need to be subdued before the White Tree could grow in peace. While we are told of battles in both the east and at the haven of Umbar, home of the Corsairs, we learn that Haradrim embassies would travel to Aragorn's court, and we are told his reign would largely be one of peace with the south. King Elessar would live to 210 years old, and like the great kings of Numenor of old, he would wait not for the decay of time, but give up his life willingly, embracing the gift of men. In one of Tolkien's most beautiful and heartbreaking writings, Aragorn's life ends with a discussion of mortality with his wife, Arwen. The queen would lay down her own life the following year. Aragorn is laid to rest in Rath Dinen upon his death on March 1st, 120 of the Fourth Age. And at this time, Merry and Pippin are moved to their final resting place, alongside Aragorn. Aragorn and Arwen are survived by their son, Eldarion, and at least 2 daughters. Eldarion becomes the second High King of the reunited kingdom, as heir of the royal house of Tel-Contar. Tel-Contar being the Quenya translation of Strider. The final 2 members of the Fellowship, the unlikely friends Gimli and Legolas, would likewise leave the mortal lands together. After their journey in Fangorn Forest, Gimli would return to Erebor, and Legolas to his father's woodland realm in Mirkwood. They both returned to find that war had marched upon their homes of the north, and both would come to make their way back to the south. Gimli takes a group of dwarves to dwell in the glittering caves behind Helm's Deep, with the permission of King Eomer. These great craftsmen would help King Elessar to rebuild the gates of Minas Tirith with both steel and mithril. It is said the dwarves would accomplish great works in both Gondor and Rohan, aiding their Mannish friends. Gimli would share much of his people's history with his friends Merry, Pippin, and Aragorn, contributing the history of Durin's folk to the Red Book, also known as Appendix A, as well as the genealogical tree of the Dwarves of Erebor. For the coming decades, Gimli would be known as the Lord of the Glittering Caves, and presumably he would make good on his promise to Galadriel, setting the 3 strands of her hair in crystal as a pledge of goodwill between the mountain and the wood until the end of days. For his part, Legolas would bring a group of his own people out of the north. Traveling from Greenwood, they would come to dwell in Ithilien, helping it to once again become the fairest country in all the Westlands. And alongside Gimli's dwarves and the King Elessar, they would help in rebuilding and improving Minas Tirith. After Aragorn's death in 120 of the Fourth Age, Legolas would come to the coast of Middle-earth with his friend Gimli, now aged 262. Together they would sail into the west, Legolas finally answering the call of the sea upon his heart, and Gimli becoming the first and only dwarf ever to make the voyage. Legolas and Gimli together pass beyond the mortal lands, the last surviving members of the Fellowship of the Ring. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Listen Me the Cinda, Kella Brimbor, The Mighty Mim, Team Weasel, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, Toby Mob's Music, CCDC Red Team, Nerd Sidgeman Anytimer, Pelkey Sports Cards, Mookie the Brown, Christopher Carbaugh, Joe Tepper, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darracott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Michael Wu, Grant McGregor, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.